Blockheads, it's month 2 in the Graphic Jam Block of the Month program, and this month we're going to be making our light orange block. In your bag this month you'll have a little packet of fabric, and I don't know if it'll be in your bag or if we will just hand you these 2 pieces of paper. I have been experimenting with foundation paper that you use for foundation paper piecing. I told you last month that I was having trouble with ink and toner transfer, and so we are trying these 2 products out to see which one works better. You're going to have 2 different kinds. The heavier one, it's harder to see through, it's not as transparent. It's called Stable Stuff Poly by Ricky Timms. It looks like this if you buy it in a package. This, supposedly, you don't have to take out. You can leave this in your quilt, and it's just going to add, when you wash it, it turns into a thin layer of poly inside your quilt. We're going to try that before we recommend that you leave the papers in, but because we aren't taking the papers out until the end of the quilt, I'm going to let you know in a future month whether or not that works. The other piece of paper you have is a lot more transparent. It looks a lot more like vellum paper. I don't know if you can see through. I've really liked this one when I've been working this month because you can see through if you have your paper if you have your fabric in the right place and if it's covered your entire piece on the back. This is by June Taylor, and we are going to have both of these products in the shop. We have ordered them, but we are continuing to have problems with some suppliers getting products as quickly as we used to. So we're hoping to have this by the time we distribute the blocks this month, but we may not, okay? But I'd like you, we're going to give you a piece of each to try. Try them both, see what you prefer, and let me know. The other thing in your kit this month is your fabric. The first thing you'll find is a 2 3/4 inch strip of color 3. This is bright orange and it has coffee cups on it. You are going to cut pieces B1 from this, and you're going to cut 4 2 3/4 inch squares from this piece of fabric. Okay, so that's pretty easily done. And then label them B4 because that's how you're going to know where to put them in your quilt. The next thing you will find is 2 strips of light orange. One is 5.5 inches and one is 7.5 inches. And you are going to make these cuts from those strips. From your 7.5 inch strip, you're going to cut 4 2 3/4 by 7.5 inch strips and label those B5. Then you're going to cut, I would cut 8 2.5 inch pieces off of there and then trim those down to 6 inches. Those are pieces B8 and B9, and I know that seems a little weird that it's the same size for both, but I'm going to show you in just a minute how that works. You're going to cut the remaining cuts for color 2 from the 5.5 inch strip. You're going to cut A2, which is 3/4 inches by 5 inches. You'll just, after you cut off the 3/4 inches, trim it down to 5 inches.
3 1/4.
3 1/4, I'm sorry, thank you. 3 1/4, I can't read what I wrote here. From your piece A3 is actually 5.5 inches, so you're just going to cut off 2 3.5 inch strips for that. Label it A3, and then you're going to cut 4 2 inch by 5 inch strips. Again, you'll just trim the 1/2 inch off, okay? So you can get a 5 inch strip. You will have a little bit left of both of these pieces. Go ahead and save those for next month. The last thing you'll find is an 8 inch strip of dark blue. We're gonna cut that together in just a minute, okay? The foundation papers you're gonna use this month are found on pages E and F of your book. You'll see we're making 2 different foundations this month. You're going to have 5 blocks when you're finished. Again, we don't sew them together. We're going to leave them just separate like this to make final quilt construction easier. This is foundation A, and you will see that it says foundation A on your piece. This is on page E of your book. You're going to make 2 copies of page E. You're either going to copy them onto copy paper like you did last month, or you can copy them onto one of the 2 foundation papers that we've given you for this month, okay? If you use those, you're going to put them through your printer, and it recommends that you print with light ink, but I will be very honest, I couldn't see the lines when I did that, so just go ahead and copy with your normal copy settings. If you have trouble getting it through your printer, let me know, and we'll try to troubleshoot what the problem is. So you're going to make 2 copies of page E from your book. You will have 2 foundation A, and then you will have blocks 5 and blocks 9. So you're just going to save those blocks for month 5 and month 9. Then you're going to make 4 copies of page F, and that is these blocks, and it's only these blocks. This is foundation B. So your pieces that are labeled A1, A2, A3, A4, and A5, I think there's 5. Those you're going to use to construct foundation A. For B, there's B1 through B9, and you're going to use those to construct foundation block B. You'll notice I told you, you'll see that there's B6, B7, and B8 and B9 are the same pieces. Here's why. It's a symmetrical block at that point, okay? And those will come out looking like this. When the block goes together, it'll end up looking like a big arrow kind of pointing at the middle. At this point, we are going to show you how to cut up your dark blue fabric. Remember, once you've got all 5 blocks done, if you bring them into the shop and show us, we will put your name in the prize bucket, and the ultimate prize is free long arming. Okay, so we'll see you in a minute to cut up to cut up the dark blue fabric. Okay, the first thing I notice when I take this piece out of my bag is that it's quite wrinkly, and especially this pressed in wrinkle in the middle and these down the middle, it can affect your cutting. So I am using a steamy iron. Remember, with foundation paper piecing, we don't usually use steam on the iron, but when we're getting wrinkles out of fabric, that's a different story. So I'm using a steamy iron to press all of these wrinkles out of my piece of fabric before I start cutting. And I would do this with all the strips that are in my bag, not just this one. It's just that this is the only one you're seeing me cut this month. So I always get the wrinkles out of my fabric before I cut. The next thing I'm going to do is cut the selvage off one end, and I'm going to cut from this end, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut the selvage off. I usually, when I get started cutting, have 2 different size rulers. I have a smaller ruler because when we're cutting the 2 and 3 inch squares or the 2.5 inch squares, you get better control with a smaller ruler. But when we're cutting bigger pieces, which we're going to do in a few minutes, then I use my bigger ruler. The first pieces we're going to cut are pieces B6 and B7, and those pieces are 1.5 by 8 inches. The first thing I'm going to do is check and make sure that my piece of fabric is 8 inches exactly. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is, and it's staying even on that line and this line, so I know I've got an 8-inch piece. So I'm going to cut off 8 1.5 inch pieces or strips. And these, I'm actually going to move this at an angle. I am not using the lines on my mat here. I am using the lines on my ruler. And I do it this way to force myself to use the ruler. You get much better, more accurate cuts if you cut under your ruler. So I'm lining this up. I'm lining my fabric up here. I've measured over 1.5 inches, and I've got that 1/2 inch line even all the way down. And I've got both my top and bottom are straight on straight lines there. So I know this piece is exactly 1.5 by 8. Okay? Whoop. And I'm going to do that 7 more times. And each time I'm going to make sure that I am lined up on 3 sides. I put pressure directly over the fabric so that I know that the fabric underneath my ruler isn't going to wiggle, and I cut my strips off. Once I'm done, I'm going to be sure and label these pieces B6 and B7, because that is how I know. The B means I'm going to use them on foundation B, not on, remember our foundation, we're making 2 different blocks this month, A and B. The B means I'm going to use them on foundation block B, and the 6 and 7 means I'm going to use them as pieces 6 and piece 7. And I have to make sure I've got this at an angle because the lines of my ruler were lining up with the lines on my mat, and that confuses me. Whoop. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I need 8. So I got to do 2 more. 7. And again, I'm lining up on 3 sides, and I'm putting pressure directly on the fabric. And now I have 8. So I'm going to label those B6 and B7, and I'm going to clip them together and save them for that. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is cut off a 10-inch strip. This, I don't have a ruler big enough to cut this, so I do have to use the lines on my mat. So now it's the same thing. I'm lining up on 3 sides. I'm lining up here, I'm lining up even with the last line on my mat, and I'm lining up here. Some people would now use the numbers on their mat. I don't, I count. We need a 10-inch strip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I need to line up on this line. After I do that, I double check that my piece that's laying down there is even with the lines on the mat, and it's not. Okay. And you can see this is not easy. That's why I prefer to cut under the ruler. Okay, so I'm lined up on that line, I'm lined up here, and I'm lined up here. I give it one more check because once I do this, I can't undo it. Okay, so we're going to set this piece aside, and from this 10-inch by 8-inch piece, we're going to cut pieces B. We're going to cut piece B3. So what we're going to do is turn this, because I'm gonna cut off 2 pieces that are 2.5 inches by 10 inches. And just so you all don't feel bad about messing things up every once in a while, the first time I did this, I did it wrong. So we're gonna cut, I've measured 2.5 inches under my ruler. I'm lined up on 3 sides. I'm gonna cut, and then I'm going to do that again. And now piece B3 is actually 2.5 inches by 5. What the heck? There we go. 2.5 inches by 5. So I'm going to grab my smaller ruler, and I'm going to measure over 5 inches, and then I'm going to line up on 3 sides. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm lined up here, here, and along the bottom. And then, if I've done this right, I'm going to double check this one and make sure it's also, and it is, it's perfectly 5 inches. I need 4 of piece B3, so I'm just cutting the 2.5 inch strips I cut off in half, essentially, to get my 2.5 by 5. Okay? So again, we cut off a 10-inch strip, We turned the 10-inch strip, so we cut off 2 pieces that were 2.5 inches by 10 inches, and then we cut those in half to be 2.5 by 5.5 inches. We're labeling those B3, 2.5 by 5 inch. Yeah, okay. I was an English major, not a math major, you guys. So I'm labeling those B3 and I'm setting them aside. This piece I have left should be 3 inches by 8. And it is. So from this, I'm gonna cut piece A1. I just need 2 2 3/4 inch square pieces. So again, I turn this at an angle so I don't get confused by the lines on the mat. And I'm gonna cut off a 2 3/4 inch piece, and then I'm gonna turn it and trim it so it's a 2 3/4 inch square. So there's one, and I'm just gonna repeat it so I get 2. So I'm gonna trim off a 2 3/4 inch piece. Right now it's 2 3/4 by 3. I'm going to trim it down so it's 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. Lined on 3 sides. Trim that off. These are piece A1. I'm going to label those and set them aside. And now, this piece we have left, we need to cut a 4.5 inch strip off of here the long way. So we've got a couple of options. One is turn the mat and cut it this way. Some people like to fold it in half. I don't really like to do that unless I have selvages on both ends, so I know I'm getting a nice square cut. So I'm going to turn my mat. And now I'm going to cut off a 4.5 inch strip. Okay, so again, I'm going to line up on 3 sides because we've been cutting off this, so it should be pretty square, and this end is a selvage. So I'm lined up here, and I'm lined up all the way down on my 1, 2, 3, 4.5 inch line, almost all the way down. The only issue here is because we've cut off of this, we can't, it's not falling directly on a line at the bottom. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. Instead, I'm going to make a mental note that I need to square up that bottom. So I'm square here and I'm on a line here. I'm going to cut off my 1, 2, 3, 4.5 inch strip. This piece we're going to save for next month. And this piece, remember I told you at the bottom here I've got an issue. So I'm just going to quickly square up. I'm going to turn it. What I'm going to do here is I lined up my top on a solid black line on my ruler. My bottom is actually on line 2, so I've got a little bitty bit sticking off all the way down. I'm just going to cut that off. And now I know I've got a square edge over here. Okay, from here, for B2, we need 4 pieces that are 2.5 by 4.5. So we just made this 4.5, so we're going to cut 2.5 inches. And we're going to cut off 4 of these. I got lined up on 3 sides. 1. These are pretty easy to cut, especially with a smaller ruler. 2. Once you've learned to cut under the ruler, the biggest tip I can give you is put even pressure on the piece you're cutting off, and you shouldn't have any troubles. Especially if you have Quilter Select rulers. These are non-slip, so once you look at your fabric moves with the ruler. They're really amazing. Okay, these are piece B2. I'm going to label them and clip them. So I've got them all together. And the last thing we have to cut is pieces A4 and A5. We need 4 of those, and they need to be 4 by 1 3/4 inches. This is 4 1/2, so I'm just going to cut off my 1 3/4 inches, and then that's 1 3/4, and now I'm going to trim it down to 4. So I turn my ruler so I can measure this way. Same thing, I line up on 3 sides. The 4-inch line right here. Cut off that little bit. Some people tell you, they like to point out, I'll show you real quick here, that you could you could just stack your pieces up and trim them all down at once. So some people would tell you to stack these 2 on top of each other and trim them down to 4. I don't do that. I find I don't line them up perfectly, or once I've stacked them, then when I go to trim them down, one underneath can wiggle. I don't know. I've had too many bad things happen to me with cutting. I prefer to just take the time to cut them accurately so I don't have
if you cut wrong. Cut more than
well,
one
that's
wrong.
true too. Yeah, if you cut wrong, then you've cut 2 or 3 of them wrong instead of just 1. Also a good point. Okay, so we've got all 4 of those. We've got a little bit of this left, and like I said, a strip. Go ahead and set those aside. Don't get rid of them. If you have cut wrong, you should have enough there to solve your problem. If you haven't cut wrong, save them for next month. But if you did do something wrong, don't be afraid to cut into those pieces to solve your problem, okay? And if something else happened, just come into the shop and we will get those, we'll get you straightened out, okay? So these are your pieces that you cut from your dark blue fabric. You know how to use your foundations. If you have any troubles at all, go ahead and call us or stop by the shop, okay? Happy stitching. Let us know if you've got any problems. See you next month.